Now that we have WSUS installed and configured, we can actually go to the console and look at all the settings. So in Server Manager, I'm going to click on Tools. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and I have my WSUS in the list. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to just pull up the console for us. Whenever anyone thinks about WSUS, updates are what you think about because that is the primary purpose of this. So we'll look at the updates first. Under the updates, if I click on all updates, these options at the top I'm going to change. So this approval, I'm going to click that down arrow and I'm going to say I want to see unapproved updates. Under the status, I could set this to updates that failed, like they failed to install, updates that my clients need, but I'm going to choose any. If I refresh, I'm viewing all my updates. So I have downloaded 146 updates, and at the top it tells me I am looking at 146 of 146. So depending on what you want to view, you just change these options. Now I've not approved any updates, but if I had and I just wanted to see those approved updates, I could just click on approved and it would show me just those. Well, I'm going to right click one of these updates and we're going to look at some of the options. If I know I do not need an update, it's for maybe Windows Media Player, and I know I will never deploy that update, then I can simply decline the update. If I want the update to be installed, I can approve it. I'm going to just click on approve here. And now it says, who do I want to approve this for? All computers, unassigned computers. So I could approve for install. At any of these levels, I could approve for install. Now to do that, I do need a right click. So I'm going to right click, approve for install. And I'm going to click OK. And it tells me that was successfully approved. So I'm going to close this window. Now, if I go back to my approval, I'm going to click approved and refresh. Now I can see just the one update that's been approved. For that update we approved, I could decline it if I wanted it to be declined. I'm going to change this back to unapproved. And I'm going to refresh again. And we'll right click another update. If I don't want the update to be installed, we could decline, as I said earlier. I could also look at the revision history. Now, this update I just clicked on, I can see changes from previous revisions. It says this update has not changed in any way. If you've ever set up pondering, how does Microsoft detect an issue in the operating system, and it seems like they almost immediately have a patch for it? Well, the reason is, the first patch they put out, often called an A revision, sometimes called a 100 revision, that patch may not be perfect. Now, they do a lot of testing at Microsoft. They then deploy the patch, but it may have some issues. So later on, they may revise the patch, and they deploy the revised patch, which may be a more stable patch. This just lets me know if anything has changed from one revision to the next as you look through these updates. Under updates, that's really all you have. Now, the all updates just shows me all the updates that exist. If you click on critical updates, that is just a filter that would show you critical updates. I could view just security updates. And for this, if I go back to, any and refresh, you would just see those updates eventually would populate in the list. Just depends on the updates and their category. So these are basically filters. WSUS updates are a little different. WSUS updates are updates for the WSUS product. Now note, I said for the WSUS product, not the WSUS server. A WSUS server is just a Server 2016 operating system. It would get updates like other operating systems. So no difference there. But the WSUS updates would be updates for the product, meaning if Microsoft releases a new version of Windows 10, like version 1809 for Windows 10, one day you'll look in WSUS and you won't see any products related to that. The next day you look in and you will see those Windows 10 version 1809 updates will show up and you can download those updates. That's an example of a WSUS update. Microsoft releases a new product, that product appears in WSUS, then you can choose to download updates or not for that product. So under updates, that's really all we wanted to look at. Now we're going to drop to the bottom. This options. Everything you want to configure is going to be under options. The first thing we're concerned about, if I go to the bottom of this list, I have the WSUS server configuration wizard. If I click on that, it is the same exact wizard we went through before. So I could decide if I want to participate in that update improvement program. If I click next, I can decide if I want to synchronize from Microsoft or from another WSUS. This is the same wizard we saw. The benefit of this, if I need to reconfigure WSUS, I could simply walk through the wizard and make all the changes I need. Well, I'm going to cancel that because we've seen all those options. Now, some of the options we did see though, sync schedule, classifications, products, languages, proxy servers. Well, now if I cancel this wizard, if I go to the top of this list, you'll just notice that most of those are individual options. So if I click on the first thing in the list, update source and proxy server, same exact options we saw in that initial configuration wizard, but if you want to make a change to those, you could simply come here and make that change. An interesting option here. If I have a WSUS server in my headquarters location in Washington, and now I want to put another WSUS in Seattle, like we discussed in the diagram, if that's true, I would go to the WSUS in Seattle and I would specify the name of the WSUS in Washington. That would make the WSUS in Washington my upstream server. In Seattle, I'm the downstream server. So now, my headquarters location in Washington downloads each update one time from Microsoft. Then across my WAN link, my WSUS in Seattle would download the update just one time across the WAN link. That would be the ultimate in efficiency. If your computer is in Washington, we would have you use the Washington WSUS. If your computer is in Seattle, you would use the Seattle WSUS server. This option at the bottom, this server is a replica of the upstream server. Let's say my location in Seattle has 300 computers. That's it. I don't have an IT staff there, and I know they need the same exact updates. What I can do is effectively make my downstream WSUS in Seattle, I can make it like a distribution point. To do that, I would click this server is a replica of the upstream server. And it tells us a replica server mirrors update approvals, settings, computers, groups from its parent. Updates can be approved only on the upstream server. So all that means to me, on my upstream server in Washington, in our example, I would approve all the updates I want, decline the updates I do not want. They would simply be replicated down to my downstream WSUS already in that state. So never would I go to the downstream WSUS and be concerned about approving updates or anything like that. It would simply mirror the parent. So really it's a distribution point. The benefit to that would be my 300 computers in Seattle don't have to cross a WAN link to download the updates. They download the updates from the WSUS in Seattle, but I don't have to manually administer that server. If you do not select that, you are a non-replica is what I prefer to call it, but Microsoft refers to that as an autonomous WSUS, where you are still a downstream server, but now you have to approve and manage all the updates on that downstream server. So this just saves bandwidth, but both servers have to be administered, independent of one another. In addition to that, there is an option, very straightforward. Use SSL when synchronizing update information. So across our WAN link, if I want that connection to be encrypted with SSL, I could just choose that. But I'm going to cancel this window here. Products and classifications we saw in the wizard. I can decide which products I want to download updates for. Classifications we saw as well. Critical updates, security updates, service packs. So really you would only use these options if you want to modify something. Update files and languages we saw as well. store the update files locally on the server. If I want to manage the languages, all that I can define at this level. So I'll cancel that. Synchronization schedule we saw. I set synchronize manually. I could set this to synchronize automatically, and I could choose what time I want to synchronize and how many times a day. The automatic approvals is very interesting. With the automatic approvals, a fear that a lot of environments have is that Microsoft releases an update. Maybe it's a critical update or a security update, and somehow this update gets approved without any testing. It has an adverse effect on my computers, and now machines won't boot, applications may not work. Now, unlikely that happens, but it is possible. So the solution is to test every update before you deploy it, and most environments go through some form of testing. A very common thing you'll see is that environments will approve updates for the computers in the IT department first. If they don't break those computers, then after 7 days or whatever amount of time they deem, they then approve those updates for other computers on the network. Now, part of the theory behind that, if an update is going to break a computer, is there a better computer to break than one in the IT department? Some people like that idea, some people do not, because in the IT department, you would be the ones that would actually have to fix any of those issues anyway. Some environments like that, other environments do not. Truly the common reason environments do that is because administrators simply may not have time to sit around and test individual updates on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to see what the effects are. So they just load them on their computers. If they don't break anything, they assume the update's stable and it gets deployed. Just depends on your environment. But something I can do, I can create an automatic approval rule. So if I click New Rule, under Step 1, I can check this when an update is a specific classification. If I go to Step 2, it says when an update is in any classification. That's a hyperlink I can click on. If I click on that, I'm going to deselect all classifications, and I'm going to choose security. So now, I want an automatic approval rule only for security updates. I'll click OK there. Back under Step 1, when an update is in a specific product. Under Step 2, it says any product. I'm going to click on that link. And I could select just the products we want. Now, normally you'd match this with the products you downloaded. But I'm going to just click, I'll just click Windows. And I can decide for which computers. All computers, if we've created computer groups. The last thing under Step 1 is to set a deadline for approval. When I click that, it defaults to 7 days after approval at 3 a.m. But I can set that to whatever number of days, whatever time I want. What that means, once an update has been downloaded, if I do not approve it in 7 days, it's going to automatically approve itself after 7 days at that time. So if I don't do anything, this is going to be approved and automatically start being installed. The downside to that update may not have been tested. Because if it was tested, then we likely would have manually approved it. The trade-off is you would not have any updates simply fall through the cracks because maybe the primary person that's responsible for this went on vacation and no one else approved updates. So I always say you can pick your poison. Ideally, we'd approve these on a manual schedule where we test and approve, but the fear is if one falls through the cracks, you could have some vulnerability. Trade-off being, if you don't test it, it could affect productivity. But all we have to do is give this a name. I'll name it Auto Approval. And I'll click OK, and that rule exists. If I click the Advanced tab here, two unrelated options. One is for WSUS updates. Automatically approve updates to the WSUS product itself. That would be new versions of Windows 10 would show up in the products list. New classifications. There's no testing or security or anything like that. that would have you concerned about the WSUS updates. That's just updates at the product level. So sometimes that can seem a little confusing. The other concern, revisions to updates. Now, we mentioned this earlier, but if Microsoft puts out an initial version of a patch, we'll call it a 100 version, they may next week discover that causes some stability issues, so they revise that patch and they put out a new patch. A concern, if I've approved patch 1, do I want to test and approve patch 2, patch 3, 4, all these future revisions? Maybe you do. If you are in an environment that has a policy that says every update is going to be tested, then maybe you want to do that. Other environments will say, well, I approve the initial update, so I want to go ahead and automatically have revisions approved. Now, that is strictly up to your environment and the powers that be. What we care about is the fact that by default, under revisions to updates, automatically approve new revisions of updates that are already approved. So if you never check this setting, you approve an initial update. Any revisions, they're automatically going to be approved. Automatically decline updates when a new revisions causes them to expire. Now, that just makes sense. If there's a 100 version of a patch, then there's a 200 version of the same patch. You have no need to ever install both because the 200 version actually supersedes the 100 version because it's the newer patch. What this will do, when the revised patch, the 200 version we'll call it, when that is approved, it automatically sets the older patch to decline, so I don't have to navigate through and look for it or figure out which one it is. I have no concerns about both being installed. I'm not making any changes here, so I'm just going to click cancel in that window. That was the longest of these settings. Well, discussion-wise, the longest. The only others, computer groups. Now this says use the Update Services console. Well, if I click OK for that, back on the left, if I click computers, I'm going to expand that and click on all computers there. There's an option to add a computer group here. I can simply type in the name of the group. If I do that, the downside is if I have 300 computers, my 300 computers by default will show up under this unassigned computers, and I would manually have to add each one to the group in this WSUS console. Not to be confused with like an Active Directory group. There are no permissions or anything associated with this group. It strictly gives me the ability to approve an update for a group of computers. I'm going to go back to options. And under my options, I'm going to go back to computers, and I'm going to change this to use group policy or registry settings on the computer. And I'm going to click OK for that. Now, I'm just going to go to the command prompt, and I'm going to type GP update /force. I could have typed this in the run box and it would have done the same. I just prefer to type it here. Computer policy is updated successfully. It'll tell me in a moment user policy is updated. So that is done. Now, sometimes it takes a moment. But in WSUS, I'm just going to refresh the console. It'll take a moment, but that group that we defined in group policy is going to show up in this list. So we'll give that a moment, but it'll eventually show up in this list. And the reason it will is because that group policy object we created named WSUS applies to this computer account. So it's going to read that and it's going to apply it here. Under options, those were the big configuration settings. The only other one that I personally like, this server cleanup wizard. A concern in WSUS that can look a little scary. WSUS has reporting built into it. So there are several options for reports that show up here. Now to view these reports, you do have to install this report viewer. So if you click on any of these, it gives you a hyperlink to install this report viewer 2012 redistributable. So you do have to install that before you can see the detail reports. But the concern, if I re-image a machine, that keeps showing up in WSUS. Like the old machine keeps showing up and it's going to tell me it's missing a bunch of updates. So it looks like you have a lot of machines that are out of date. To make that a little more accurate, if we go back to options and server cleanup wizard, I can say if a computer has not contacted WSUS in 30 days, that I want that computer to be removed from WSUS. I want it to stop reporting. Now, there's no downside to that, because if that computer ever connects to your network again, it automatically will re-register with WSUS and show back up in the list, but eliminates me having these stale, outdated computer accounts show up. I can also choose to delete unused revisions, unused updates, updates that have expired. So whatever options we define here, we can just run through that wizard to clean those up. Now, I have really nothing to clean, so it runs pretty quick. This just helps maintain WSUS. And that is finished. To finish exploring the console, well, we looked at the options, reports, synchronizations. This shows me when I last synchronized, if it was successful, and what was downloaded. It also gives me the option to force a synchronization, since I said I wanted to manually synchronize, or if I click synchronization options, it just carries me back to my options here, and you can define your synchronization schedule. But that's all you can do there. View the status of your syncs and manually force a sync to occur right now. I don't have any downstream servers, but if I did actually install a second server as a downstream, it would show up in the list, and it would tell me if it's an autonomous WSUS or a replica, as we talked about earlier, and it would also tell me the last time it synchronized successfully. So quite a bit of this is actually reporting. To reiterate, options is the full configuration of WSUS, and then the updates will be the other big component that we manage. I'm going to refresh this again. So I'm going to just click on my server, and I'm going to click refresh. When I expand my computers, all computers, now that HR Win10 clients group we created through group policy shows up in the list. In summary, I would say WSUS is not at all a challenging service to configure. It just has quite a few moving parts. You need to install the WSUS and configure the WSUS itself. Then you must configure group policy so your clients know to connect to your WSUS server itself.